A struggling artist painted a stranger, unknowingly capturing the true face of her father. The words echoed in Olivia Bennet's mind as she stared at her empty canvas, the irony of the phrase lost on her as she contemplated her next piece. Her studio apartment, barely deserving of the word studio, felt particularly cold that morning. November rain tapped against the windows like impatient fingers, the gray light offering little inspiration for someone whose rent depended on creating beauty. The chill seeped through the thin walls, but Olivia couldn't afford to turn up the heat. Instead, she wrapped her mother's old cardigan tighter around her shoulders, the worn fabric carrying the ghost of lavender perfume, a scent that transported her instantly to childhood. To when her mother's laughter filled rooms instead of the hollow silence that followed her passing 3 years ago. Just one good piece, she whispered to herself, her breath forming a small cloud in the cold air. One piece that sells. Her phone buzzed with another email from her landlord. Third notice. Final warning. Her fingers trembled slightly as she set it face down on her paint-splattered table. 27 years old, and what did she have to show for it? A half-finished art degree abandoned when her mother got sick. A collection of paintings no gallery would touch. And a stack of unpaid bills that grew taller each week. Olivia hadn't always been alone. Once there had been her mother, Eleanor, with her endless encouragement and unconditional love. "You have your father's gift," she would say, though she never elaborated on who that father was. Just that he had been an artist, too, that he had left before Olivia was born, that some people weren't meant for family life. The gaps in the story had grown into chasms over the years, questions Olivia had stopped asking when she saw how they dimmed the light in her mother's eyes. Now, in the stillness of her apartment, those questions felt like luxuries from another lifetime. The coffee shop across the street was her one indulgence, not for the coffee she could barely afford, but for the warmth and the faces. Today, as the rain turned to sleet, she gathered her sketchbook and the last $5 in her wallet. Perhaps inspiration waited there, amid the steam and murmured conversations. The bell above the door announced her arrival at Bella's Coffee, the warm air hitting her face like an embrace. The scent of roasted beans and cinnamon wrapped around her, a momentary respite from the cold outside and the colder reality waiting back in her apartment. The usual live? Marco, the barista with kind eyes and a knowing smile, already reached for a mug. "Thanks." She placed her $5 bill on the counter, ignoring how it represented her last financial cushion. Some days warmth was worth more than security. She settled into her corner table, the one with the view of both the street and the entire cafe. Perfect for sketching unsuspecting subjects, people caught in moments of authenticity. Her fingers, stiff from the cold, gradually loosened as she began to draw the teenage girls giggling over shared secrets, the elderly man reading yesterday's newspaper, the young mother bouncing a fussy baby on her knee. And then she saw him. He sat alone by the window, his profile outlined by the gray light filtering through the rain-streaked glass. Something about him seized her attention, not his appearance, though that was striking enough. A man in his early 60s, perhaps, with silver threading through dark hair, deep lines etched around eyes that seemed fixed on something far beyond the rain-soaked street. No, it was the profound solitude that surrounded him, an isolation Olivia recognized immediately because it mirrored her own. Her pencil moved before she made any conscious decision. Swift, sure strokes captured the angle of his jaw, the slight downward turn of his mouth, the way his long fingers curled around his mug as if seeking warmth beyond the physical. There was a story in those hands, artist's hands, her mind registered distantly, with faint stains of color beneath the nails, calluses on the fingertips that spoke of work beyond mere hobby. She drew with an intensity that surprised her, the world around them fading into background noise. Time slipped away as she sketched, adding shadows, capturing the peculiar light in his eyes, a mixture of sorrow and something else she couldn't name but felt compelled to understand. When she finally looked up from her sketchbook, she realized with a start that he was watching her. Their eyes met across the cafe, and a current of recognition passed between them, though they had never spoken. He nodded once, a gesture so slight she might have imagined it, then left money on his table and walked out into the rain without looking back. Olivia stared at her drawing, unable to explain the trembling in her hands. She had captured something in his face that felt hauntingly familiar, like a word on the tip of her tongue that refused to be spoken. Without understanding why, she knew she needed to paint him, Not just sketch, but commit this stranger to canvas with oils and purpose. The walk back to her apartment barely registered. Her mind was already mixing colors, planning compositions, seeing the finished piece before she'd even begun. For the first time in months, the weight of her circumstances lifted slightly, replaced by the urgent need to create. That night, working by the light of her single lamp, Olivia started the painting. She worked feverishly, as if afraid the image of the man would fade from her memory if she didn't capture it immediately. The canvas came alive under her brush, the subtle blend of shadow and light that defined his features, the weathered dignity in his posture, the eyes that seemed to hold volumes of unspoken stories. She painted until her vision blurred and her shoulders ached, until the first pale light of dawn crept into her apartment. When she finally stepped back, something about the half-finished portrait made her heart constrict with an emotion she couldn't name. "Who are you?" she whispered to the face emerging from her canvas. The next day, despite her exhaustion, she returned to the coffee shop, hoping to see the stranger again. Her sketchbook lay open on the table, ready, but he didn't appear, nor the next day or the day after that. Yet each night she returned to the painting, adding details from memory, losing herself in the work in a way she hadn't experienced since before her mother's illness. A week passed. The painting neared completion, and with each brushstroke, a strange uneasiness grew within her. There was something about his eyes, something in the set of his mouth that tugged at her memory. She found herself digging through old photographs of her mother, searching for clues to this strange connection she felt to a man she'd never spoken to. On the day she applied the final touches to the painting, a letter arrived. The envelope bore the logo of the Hayes Gallery, a small but respected space in the arts district where she had submitted her portfolio months ago, a desperate attempt she had almost forgotten. With trembling fingers, she tore it open, hardly daring to hope. "Dear Miss Bennett," it began, "we would be pleased to feature your work in our upcoming New Perspectives exhibition." Olivia read the letter 3 times before its meaning penetrated her disbelief. They wanted to feature her work, specifically mentioning her powerful portraiture capturing the human condition. The exhibition was in 2 weeks. They requested she bring her strongest piece. She looked up at the portrait of the stranger, now complete and luminous in the afternoon light. There was no question which piece she would submit. The night of the exhibition arrived, bringing with it a nervous energy Olivia hadn't felt in years. She wore her mother's dress, a simple black sheath that Eleanor had saved for special occasions, and her mother's small pearl earrings. As she fastened them, she could almost hear Eleanor's voice. "I'm so proud of you, my darling girl." The Hayes Gallery was transformed for the evening, soft lighting and the quiet murmur of conversations creating an atmosphere of expectation. Olivia's painting hung on the main wall, larger and more commanding than she remembered it being in her small apartment. She stood slightly apart from the gathering crowd, watching as people paused before her work, their expressions shifting as they took it in. "Remarkable depth," she overheard someone say. The emotion in those eyes. The gallery owner, Victoria Hayes, a formidable woman with silver hair and impeccable taste, appeared at her side. "Your piece is generating quite a buzz, Ms. Bennett." "There have already been inquiries about the price." Olivia blinked in surprise. "It's for sale?" Victoria raised an elegant eyebrow. "Everything is for sale, my dear. Isn't that why we're here?" She handed Olivia a glass of champagne. "Drink this. Mingle. Enjoy your moment." But Olivia found it difficult to celebrate. As more people gathered around her painting, she felt a growing unease. Who was this man she had painted with such intensity? Why did his face haunt her dreams? She had titled the piece simply "Stranger," unable to find words that captured the complexity of what she felt when she looked at it. She was considering slipping away early when a hush fell over the room. Following the shift in attention, she turned to see him, the subject of her painting, standing in the doorway of the gallery. In person, he seemed both exactly as she had captured him and somehow more. There was a gravitational pull to him, a presence that her painting, for all its emotional accuracy, couldn't fully convey. Their eyes met across the room, and the world around them seemed to blur at the edges. He moved toward her painting with slow, deliberate steps, the crowd parting unconsciously to let him through. When he stood before it, his expression was unreadable, a complex mixture of emotions passing across his face like shadows. Olivia found herself moving toward him, drawn by an inexplicable force. When she reached his side, neither spoke for a long moment. Up close, the similarities she had sensed but couldn't place became clearer. Something in the set of his jaw, the particular arch of his eyebrows, the hands that could have been her own. "You captured me," he finally said, his voice low and rough with emotion. "Not just my face. I don't even know your name," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned to her then, her eyes, she realized with a shock, studying her face with the same intensity she had studied his. "Daniel," he said. "Daniel Bennett." The gallery around them faded to background noise as the significance of his surname registered. Bennett. Her name. Her mother's name. "My mother was Eleanor," she said, the words emerging as both question and revelation. His sharp intake of breath was answer enough. "Eleanor," he repeated, the name clearly precious and painful on his tongue. "Then you're Olivia." The moment stretched between them, 30 years of absence condensed into a single breath. "I've been looking for you," he said finally. "For years. After I left. I tried to come back, but she had moved. Changed her number." Questions crowded Olivia's mind, too numerous to voice. Why had he left? Why had her mother never told her the whole truth? Why now, after all this time? "Perhaps we could talk somewhere more private," Daniel suggested, glancing around at the curious onlookers who had begun to notice their intense conversation. Victoria Hayes approached them, her professional smile barely masking her curiosity. "Is everything all right, Missy Bennett?" Olivia nodded, unable to find words that could possibly explain what was happening. "I need to leave early," she managed finally. "Family matter." Victoria's eyes moved between Olivia and Daniel, taking in what Olivia now realized must be obvious similarities. "Of course," she said smoothly. "But you should know, your painting has sold." Daniel's expression shifted. "I'd like to buy it," he said firmly. Victoria shook her head. "I'm afraid you're too late. A collector purchased it sight unseen this afternoon." She handed Olivia a business card. "He was quite insistent. Said to contact him directly about commissioning more work." Olivia glanced at the card, then tucked it away, her mind too overwhelmed to process this additional development. "Thank you," she said automatically. "I'll be in touch tomorrow." Outside the gallery, the night air was cool against her flushed skin. Daniel stood beside her, a respectful distance between them, as if uncertain of his welcome in her life. "There's a diner around the corner," he suggested. "Open late." "We could talk there," Olivia nodded, not trusting her voice. They walked in silence, the space between them charged with unasked questions and unshared histories. The diner was nearly empty, a relic from another era with red vinyl booths and flickering fluorescent lights. They sat across from each other, two strangers connected by blood and separated by time. A tired waitress brought coffee neither of them touched. "I don't know where to begin," Daniel said finally, his hands, artist's hands, her hands, resting on the table between them. "Why did you leave?" The question that had shaped her entire life emerged without preamble. Daniel's face contracted with something like pain. "I was young, selfish, scared of failing as a father because my own had failed so completely." He paused, gathering himself. "And I was struggling with addiction. Your mother gave me an ultimatum. Get help or leave. I chose wrong." He looked down at his hands. "By the time I got clean, got my life together, years had passed. I tried to find you both, but Eleanor had moved without leaving a forwarding address. Her parents wouldn't tell me anything. I hired private investigators over the years, but..." He shook his head. "I never stopped looking. Never stopped wondering about you." "My mother never told me you were looking for us," Olivia said quietly. "She only said you were an artist, that you weren't ready for family life. She protected you from the truth. From me." His voice caught. "She was right to do that. She died 3 years ago," Olivia said, watching the news hit him like a physical blow. "I'm so sorry." His grief seemed genuine, a loss renewed rather than first experienced. "She was extraordinary. The best person I've ever known." "Yes, she was." Silence fell between them again, heavier this time. "How did you find me now?" Olivia finally asked. A sad smile touched his lips. "I didn't." "Not directly. I've been coming to that coffee shop for months. It's near my studio. I'm teaching art at the community college now." He paused. "When I saw you there, drawing, I didn't know who you were, but something about you was familiar. The way you held your pencil, maybe. The intensity in your expression as you worked." He looked at her directly, his gaze unflinching. "Then I saw the exhibition announcement in the paper yesterday. Your name, your photo? I knew immediately." Olivia tried to process this information, the strange cosmic coincidence that had brought them together. "So you came to the gallery to find me?" "Yes." His voice was steady now. "I understand if you want nothing to do with me. I've forfeited any right to be in your life. But I needed to see you, to tell you how sorry I am. For everything." The words hung between them, insufficient yet necessary. "I don't know what I want," Olivia admitted, her emotions too tangled to unravel in one night. "This is overwhelming." Daniel nodded. "Of course." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card of his own, sliding it across the table. "My number, my address. If and when you're ready to talk more." Their fingers brushed as she took the card, a momentary connection that sent an unexpected current through her. In that brief touch, she felt the weight of what might have been, and perhaps what still could be. "Thank you," she said, tucking the card beside the one from the collector. "I need time. Time is something I can give," he replied, and she heard in his voice the patience learned through regret. They parted outside the diner, the space between them still vast but somehow changed, as if a bridge had been sketched, awaiting completion. In the days that followed, Olivia moved through her life in a daze. The sale of her painting had provided temporary financial relief, enough to pay her overdue rent and utilities. Victoria Hayes had called to discuss representation, her voice warm with approval when Olivia mentioned she was working on a new series. The collector had emailed, expressing interest in commissioning portraits. Yet these professional developments felt secondary to the seismic shift in her personal life. Daniel Bennett, her father, the missing piece of her identity suddenly, improbably present. She found herself staring at his business card, running her fingers over the embossed letters of his name. Professor Daniel Bennett, Art Department. His studio address was in the warehouse district, not far from her own apartment. On the third day, she called the number. "I'd like to see your work," she said when he answered, foregoing greeting or identification, as if they'd been in the middle of a conversation all along. His pause communicated surprise, quickly mastered. "I'd be honored," he replied simply. His studio was larger than her apartment, with high ceilings and tall windows that flooded the space with northern light. Canvases lined the walls, some finished, others in various stages of completion. The sense of oil paint, turpentine, and linseed oil created an atmosphere so familiar that Olivia felt an immediate sense of belonging, as if her body recognized this space as home before her mind could process it. Daniel stood slightly apart, giving her space to take in his work without commentary or expectation. She moved slowly around the perimeter of the room, studying each painting. His style was different from hers, more abstract in composition, though with the same emotional intensity. Landscapes that weren't quite landscapes. Figures that emerged from color and shadow rather than being explicitly defined. And then she stopped, her breath catching. In the far corner hung a series of small paintings, clearly older than the rest. Women's faces, the same woman, she realized. Young and laughing, serious in profile, sleeping, her face peaceful in repose. "My mother," she whispered. Daniel moved to stand beside her, careful to maintain distance. "Yes," he confirmed. "Eleanor. I painted her constantly when we were together. These are the only ones I kept." Olivia studied the images of her mother as a young woman, barely older than Olivia was now. There was a lightness to her that Olivia had rarely seen in life, a carefree quality that had been dimmed by the struggles of single motherhood, by the compromises and sacrifices that had defined Eleanor's existence. "She was beautiful," Olivia said softly. "She was everything," Daniel replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Leaving her, leaving you, was the greatest mistake of my life." Olivia turned from the paintings to look at him directly. "Why didn't you come back sooner?" "After you got clean?" Pain flickered across his face. "I tried. For years. But your mother had moved, changed her number. Her parents refused to tell me anything." He hesitated. "And perhaps I didn't try hard enough." Fear is a powerful deterrent. Fear of rejection. Fear of causing more pain than I already had. Fear of responsibility? Olivia added, the words sharper than she intended. Daniel didn't flinch from the accusation. "Yes," he acknowledged. "That too." His honesty disarmed her slightly. She had expected excuses, justifications. The raw admission of cowardice felt like the first true thing between them. "I have questions," she said. "So many questions." "I'll answer all of them," he promised. "As honestly as I can." They sat in the small sitting area of his studio, two artists surrounded by the evidence of their shared gift. For hours they talked. Daniel told her about meeting Eleanor at an art exhibition, their whirlwind romance, the struggles that followed when his career stalled while hers flourished. He spoke of his descent into addiction, the ugly arguments, his choice to leave rather than face his failures. "Your mother never kept me from you," he emphasized. "That was my doing, my weakness." Olivia listened, trying to reconcile this story with the few details her mother had shared over the years. Eleanor had protected her from the worst truths, softening the abandonment into something less traumatic. "He wasn't ready for family life," she would say. "Never. He chose drugs over us." "Did you ever stop using?" she asked finally. "After you left?" "Not immediately," Daniel admitted. "It got worse before it got better. I hit bottom about 2 years after leaving you both. Ended up in the hospital after an overdose." His eyes grew distant with memory. "When I woke up, the first thought I had was that I would never see you grow up. Never know what kind of person you became." He looked at her directly. "That was my moment of clarity. I checked myself into rehab the next day. Been clean ever since. 25 years? Olivia calculated. 25 years, 3 months, and 17 days, he confirmed. The precision of his count spoke volumes about the significance he placed on his sobriety. Another truth between them. "I need time to process all this," Olivia said as afternoon light began to fade from the studio. "Of course." Daniel stood, maintaining the respectful distance he had kept throughout their conversation. "Thank you for coming today, for giving me the chance to explain." As Olivia prepared to leave, she paused by a canvas that stood apart from the others. Unlike most of his work, this was a realistic portrait. A young girl, perhaps 5 or 6, with familiar eyes and a serious expression. "Who is this?" she asked, though she suspected the answer. Daniel came to stand beside her, his expression softening as he looked at the painting. "You," he said quietly. "Or rather, how I imagined you might look as a child. I painted one each year on your birthday. My way of marking time, of keeping you present in my life somehow." Olivia stared at the image, this ghost of a childhood never shared. Something tight and painful expanded in her chest. "Do you have the others?" "Yes." His voice was gentle. "Would you like to see them?" She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. One by one, he brought out the paintings from a storage rack. Olivia at 7, at 10, at 13, each image an imagined milestone, created with care and longing. As he placed the last one before her, Olivia at 20, just before he'd lost hope of finding her, she felt tears spill onto her cheeks. "I would have known you anywhere," Daniel said softly. "The moment I saw you in that coffee shop, something in me recognized you, even if my conscious mind didn't make the connection." Olivia wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "I need to go," she said, suddenly overwhelmed. Daniel nodded, making no move to stop her. "I'll be here," he said simply. "Whenever you're ready." The days that followed brought a strange new rhythm to Olivia's life. Her professional fortunes continued to rise. The collector had commissioned 3 new portraits, and Victoria Hayes had sold 2 more of her existing pieces. For the first time since her mother's death, Olivia felt financially secure, able to focus on her art without the constant pressure of impending destitution. Yet her emotional landscape remained in turmoil. She found herself alternating between avoiding thoughts of Daniel entirely and obsessing over their conversations, searching her memory for clues about her mother that might corroborate or contradict his account. 2 weeks after their meeting at his studio, Olivia finally gathered the courage to open the box of her mother's personal papers, something she had avoided since Eleanor's death. Among the documents and photographs, she found a small leather-bound journal, its pages filled with Eleanor's distinctive handwriting. It was not a chronological diary, but rather a collection of thoughts, memories, and reflections spanning many years. Olivia read through it slowly, her heart catching at every mention of Daniel. To her surprise, there was no bitterness in Eleanor's words about him, only sadness and eventually, forgiveness. One entry, dated around Olivia's 10th birthday, stood out. D. Called today. His voice was clear, present in a way it never was before. He wants to see Olivia. I told him no. Am I punishing him still? Or protecting her? Perhaps both. She asks about him less often now. I wonder if that's a mercy or a loss. Olivia stared at the words, a new understanding dawning. Her mother had known Daniel was looking for them, had deliberately kept them apart out of some complex mixture of protection and lingering hurt. Another entry, dated just a year before Eleanor's diagnosis, saw Dee's work in a gallery downtown, still painting light the way he always did, finding beauty in broken things. Olivia has the same gift. Sometimes when I watch her work, I see him so clearly it takes my breath away. Have I done the right thing, keeping them apart? I don't know anymore. By the time Olivia reached the final pages, written during her mother's illness, tears flowed freely down her face. If there is one regret I carry with me, it is that I kept Olivia from knowing her father. My fear and pride cost them both a connection that might have healed us all. If there is time left, I will tell her the whole truth. If not, I hope somehow they find each other. They are so alike, my two artists. They would recognize each other's souls. Olivia closed the journal, her mind reeling with this new perspective. Her mother, always her fixed point, her North Star, had been as human and fallible as anyone, had made a choice that altered all their lives, not out of malice but out of the complicated tangle of love and pain that defined any broken relationship. The next morning, Olivia returned to Daniel's studio, the journal clutched in her hand. When he opened the door, his surprise at seeing her quickly gave way to concern at her tear-stained face. "What's wrong?" he asked, ushering her inside. Wordlessly, she handed him the journal, open to the final entry. He read it slowly, his own eyes filling with tears. "She never told me," Olivia said when he finished reading. "All those years, she let me believe you didn't want to find us." Daniel closed the journal gently. "She was protecting you from disappointment, from the mess I had made of my life." He looked at her directly. "Don't blame her for keeping us apart. The fault was mine for leaving in the first place." "I don't blame either of you," Olivia said, surprising herself with the truth of it. "Not anymore. I just want to understand." They sat together in silence for a long moment, the weight of the past gradually shifting between them. "I'd like to show you something," Daniel said finally. He disappeared into a back room, returning with a small wrapped package. "I've been waiting for the right moment to give you this." Olivia unwrapped it carefully to find a small painting, her mother, young and radiant, holding an infant wrapped in a yellow blanket. The tenderness in Eleanor's expression as she gazed at the baby was so palpable it made Olivia's chest ache. "I painted this the day after you were born," Daniel explained. "It was the most perfect moment of my life, watching Eleanor hold you for the first time. I wanted to give it to you on your 18th birthday, one of many plans I failed to keep." Olivia traced the edge of the canvas with her fingertip. "She's so young," she whispered. "We both were," Daniel replied. "Too young to understand what we had, too foolish to cherish it properly." Something unlocked in Olivia then, a door she hadn't realized was closed. Looking at this image of her beginning, her mother and father united in that brief, perfect moment before everything went wrong, she felt a connection to them both that transcended the brokenness that followed. "I'd like to paint you," she said suddenly. "A proper portrait, not a sketch in a coffee shop or a painting from memory." The offer hung between them, both more and less than forgiveness. Daniel's eyes, so like her own, filled with emotion. "I'd be honored," he said simply. And so began a new chapter. 3 times a week, Daniel came to Olivia's small apartment, sitting patiently while she captured him on canvas. They talked as she worked, about art, about Eleanor, about the years they had lost and the possibilities that lay ahead. Slowly, brushstroke by brushstroke, Olivia created not just a portrait but a relationship. Each session revealed new connections between them, shared mannerisms, similar ways of seeing the world, the same tendency to lose track of time when engrossed in creative work. The anger she had carried like a shield began to soften, making space for something more complex and ultimately more healing. Daniel, for his part, approached their growing connection with a humility that spoke of hard lessons learned. He never presumed, never pushed, accepting with grace the boundaries Olivia established. His gratitude for each moment with her was evident in every interaction, every careful response to her questions, every story shared about his struggles and triumphs over the years of their separation. As the portrait neared completion, something shifted between them. The formal structure of their sessions, artist and subject, gave way to a more natural relationship. They began meeting outside of painting times, visiting galleries together, sharing meals, discovering the myriad ways their artistic visions aligned and diverged. "You know," Daniel said one evening as they walked through an exhibition of emerging artists. "Your mother would be proud of you, not just your talent, but the person you've become." Olivia considered this. "I think she'd be proud of us both," she replied finally. "For finding each other, for trying to heal what was broken." When the portrait was finally complete, Olivia invited Daniel to her apartment for its unveiling. She had covered the canvas, wanting him to see it finished rather than in its evolutionary stages. "Ready?" she asked, her hand on the cloth covering the painting. Daniel nodded, a nervous anticipation in his expression that reminded her of her own feelings before showing new work. She removed the cloth, stepping back to allow him to see the portrait in its entirety. What she had created was not merely a likeness, but a revelation. In Daniel's face, she had captured not only who he was now, the lines etched by time and experience, the quiet dignity of his features, but echoes of who he had been and hints of who he might yet become. She had painted him with unflinching honesty and profound compassion, neither minimizing his flaws nor withholding the fundamental grace that lived alongside them. Daniel stood silent before the portrait, tears falling freely down his face. "You've seen me?" he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "All of me." "Yes," Olivia acknowledged. "That's what portraits are meant to do, isn't it? See the whole person, not just the surface." He turned to her then, his expression open and vulnerable. "Thank you," he said simply, "for seeing me, for letting me see you." In that moment, Olivia felt a circle closing, a pattern completing itself across time. She, the struggling artist, had painted a stranger, unknowingly capturing the true face of her father. But in doing so, she had also captured something of herself, of the complex inheritance that flowed between them, of the damaged but enduring connection that could never truly be broken. "I'd like you to have it," she said. "The portrait." Daniel shook his head. "No. This one is yours to keep or sell. Your work, your decision?" "I've already decided," Olivia insisted. "I want you to have it. Not because you're my father, but because you understand what it means." "What went into creating it?" After a moment, Daniel nodded, accepting the gift with the gravity it deserved. "Then I'll treasure it," he promised. As they stood together before the portrait, Olivia felt a sense of peace settle over her. The holes in her history would never completely close. The years lost could never be reclaimed. But here, now, something new had been created from the broken pieces. Not a perfect restoration, but a meaningful reconstruction, beautiful in its authenticity and possibility. Outside, rain began to fall, soft and cleansing against the windows. Inside, father and daughter stood in companionable silence. Two artists bound by blood and canvas, by loss and rediscovery, by the peculiar alchemy that transforms strangers into family and pain into purpose. In the soft light of her studio, with the portrait bearing witness, Olivia understood finally what her mother had written in those last pages of her journal. They would recognize each other's souls. And so they had, across time and canvas, finding in art the language their hearts had always shared.